Now, though, let's talk about the SNP. They've announced their pledges, their manifesto. John Swinney, the leader, actually still on stage in Edinburgh with that big launch. Michael Blackley is the political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail and has been watching. Good morning to you, Michael.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, I mean, let's just go through some of the key pledges. Surprise, surprise, deliver independence to strengthen our economy, tackle the cost of living and bring about a fairer country. But we would expect delivering independence, ending 14 years of austerity and rejoining the EU. That's kind of like bread and butter stuff for the SNP, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's no surprise when it comes to an SNP manifesto launch that independence is to the fore in that. However, there is a bit of an attempt to ride two horses here because at every general election that happens, the SNP tend to try to appeal to voters that don't support independence by telling them that the SNP will stand up for Scotland's interests. And I think today, because independence has dominated so much, the danger for the SNP is that that completely puts off everyone else. I
Yeah.
mean, the entire first page of the manifesto is about independence, and they talk about in the manifesto about how if the SNP wins a majority of seats in Scotland, then they'll take that as a mandate to begin negotiations with a UK government about giving that democratic effect, which presumably means a referendum.
Yeah.
But John Swinney was asked at the event about what happens if the SNP don't win a majority of seats, because that's what all the polls are telling us is going to happen. And he said it doesn't matter. They've got a mandate already from 2021.
Yeah.
So the SNP will be pushing for independence
Either
and
way,
an
although of course
independence
the polls
referendum
don't
regardless.
suggest polls suggest actually not only do the majority of Scots not want to actually vote for independence, they majority don't even want to have a vote. So even those who actually want to have independence don't want to have a vote anytime soon. They kind of figure there are other issues to deal with. It's interesting that again, so much of the SNP's shtick, such as all parties have their own shtick, is we hate the Tories in Westminster. I've always found it fascinating. We don't want to be ruled by Westminster. Brussels, bonjour, very happy to be ruled by you. I've always thought that was quite strange. However, this whole we hate the Tories in Westminster, when it's, as the polls again suggest, it's a Labour government on July the 5th, that line kind of ends, doesn't it? But they're saying how this is the most left-wing manifesto of the main parties. I'm wondering if it's to the left of the Greens, but is it to the left of Labour?
Well, it's an interesting issue because John Swinney keeps asserting, and he did it in his speech today, that the SNP are a party whose values they're a moderate left of centre party. And I think it's quite interesting that since he became leader, he just keeps needing to assert that. I don't think parties normally need to tell you where they stand on the political spectrum, and that maybe suggests that there's a little bit of concern about, previous leadership contests,
Yeah.
such as the one just over a year ago, showed that there were a lot of people in the SNP that would maybe be sitting in the centre right. So it's interesting that John Swinney is coming out and needing to assert that the SNP are a left of
Yeah,
centre.
indeed. And we had obviously to protect our NHS from the twin threats of Westminster privatisation and austerity. He has said the SNP, of course, in charge of the NHS, well, Scottish government, as the SNP is now leading, in charge of running the NHS in Scotland. And actually, we have not seen a better waiting list and things like that. They get to decide how much of their funding they put to the NHS. But I thought one of the most interesting things was demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. I'm not entirely sure the SNP MPs are in the power of that, but they say release of hostages, ending arms sales to Israel and calling on the UK government to immediately recognise Palestine as an independent state. This seems to have been a very big issue for the SNP.
It's continuing on from Humza Yousaf's leadership when he made it one of his biggest issues, despite, of course, foreign affairs being reserved to the UK
But
government.
he did have the
This
family link, didn't he? His in-laws were actually in Gaza.
Yeah, yeah, and the SNP have clearly been targeting a lot of that. We've seen it on the campaign trail where some of their candidates have had Palestinian flags. So that is something that the SNP are pushing, and they're saying that their MPs will be pushing for that if the SNP
Yeah.
get a number of SNP MPs elected at the election.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the big main thing here we've got is, after Nicola Sturgeon, we both, Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon, incredibly charismatic leaders, great sort of political operators. Humza Yousaf, nicknamed Humza Useless, and then John Swinney, who looks like a regional bank manager, and perhaps haven't got the star quality anymore at the SNP.
I think that is a danger. John Swinney has been about for a long time. People probably know who he is, but I don't think he has the charisma of previous leaders, and I think that is a bit of a
That's going to be an issue.
challenge.
We shall
Polling
see.
ratings aren't that good either at the moment, so
Yeah, we'll
there's
see how it plays out on July the 4th. Michael Blackley, political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Appreciate that.